Hello you guys, welcome to episode 10 of the Crime with Kylie podcast. Now I am so excited that you're joining me for today's episode because this is an extremely recent case. So recent that I have re-recorded this podcast and different parts of it 4 different times with all of the information that is coming out on a daily basis. And as I'm sure you've most likely guessed it already or read it in the title or the description, today we are going to be covering the case of Ruby Franke, the Mormon influencer mom YouTuber who has been charged with 6 counts of felony child abuse and is being held without bail. Well, her along with her business partner, Jodi Hildebrandt. So in today's episode, we are going to cover the Ruby Franke timeline. We're going to cover who Ruby Franke is, her husband Kevin Franke, the abuse allegations, what is known over the years, the many red flags that were already there, her relationship with Jodi Hildebrandt, and everything in between. Literally, I think today is September 16th of 2023. So updates up until September 16th of 2023. Because otherwise, if I keep pushing this video off with all of the updates that keep coming out, I'm probably never going to publish it. So, yeah. Without further ado, I'm going to play you guys some clips of Ruby Franke so you can get kind of an idea of who she is.
My bedroom was taken away for 7 months and then you give it back like a couple weeks ago.
I don't think our viewers know that.
You've been sleeping on a beanbag.
I've been sleeping on a beanbag since October. And they gave my room back like 2 weeks ago. Oh, I'll give you the reason why I lost my bedroom. I think so. I think this is the reason. At least this is the reason that's been in my head. It's pretty funny, but now that I look back, I mean, it's pretty depressing.
No, we never told our viewers.
That I woke Russell up at 2 in the morning and told him that we're going to Disneyland and he has to pack. And he got up and made his bed all neatly and then packed all his clothes in a suitcase. And then he walked out the door and I'm like, Russell, he was like, what? And he's all happy. Has his sunglasses on.
Do you think it's funny? Because
and then I walk out.
If you think it's funny, then that was 7 months ago. Maybe you need longer without a bedroom.
It was not funny.
Russell got the big bedroom and Chad got the smaller bedroom. And Russell's bigger bedroom also had a bathroom. But what you guys didn't know was Chad didn't get any room. He didn't get anything. He was sleeping on the floor in the family room. Abby, we took the phone away from Abby in November. And you may never get the phone back.
Probably not.
No, I have no friends.
You can play with friends.
No, like I don't have friends.
I don't have friends either.
I literally like told my friends I'm not hanging out with them anymore.
Because
they say some pretty messed up stuff.
I don't even know where they live. They're pretty far away.
So, summer goal, become the best athlete I possibly can.
More time, and then you're gonna lose the privilege to eat dinner. My kids are literally starving. I hesitate to say this because it's gonna sound like I'm like a mean barbarian.
Okay, so as you guys just saw, Ruby Franke deprived her oldest son of his bedroom for 7 whole months. And she does not seem to be guilty about it whatsoever. And as you can see, as he starts talking about it, Ruby kind of gets a little embarrassed at first, and she's like, oh, I didn't think the viewers knew about that. And then as he continues to talk about it, you can see he's so uncomfortable. He's looking away from the camera. He's kind of uncomfortably laughing. But when he starts uncomfortably laughing and starts actually making jokes about it, Ruby completely switches up and is like, oh, well, if you're laughing about it and if you think it's so funny, then maybe the punishment didn't work. Maybe I need to take away your bedroom again. Like, what kind of mother does that or says that? Or, I don't know, the fact that at the very end, both children are talking about how they don't have any friends and don't really have any time to have friends. And, you know, it makes sense because Ruby has admitted that it takes all 6 of her children to make the 8 Passengers YouTube channel make millions and be as successful as it was. Although her channel is deleted now, she had upwards of 2 million subscribers. And then in that last short clip, you can see that she's literally saying that she sounds like a barbarian, and she does, because she is depriving her children of food. And if you know anything about the arrest charges and the allegations, her children were legitimately found malnourished. And she was just owning up to that on YouTube for years. She had her 8 Passengers YouTube channel since 2015.
I know that her teacher is uncomfortable with her being hungry and not having a lunch. And it would ease her discomfort if I came to the school with a lunch. But I responded and just said, Eve is responsible for making her lunches in the morning, and she actually told me she did pack a lunch. So the natural outcome is she's just going to need to be hungry.
And now we're going to take a look at this clip.
You know what that is?
Say phone home.
keeps trying to get off the bed.
So as you can see, her youngest daughter Eve was in the hospital. She was scared. She was kind of getting some tests done. I don't necessarily know the context of the video, but that little girl is crying and her mom is just shoving a camera in her face while she's crying. And as you can see, she kind of just wants the comfort of her mom, but Ruby Franke's like, oh, let me just like kiss your forehead as comfort as long as it's on camera. I don't know how that's deemed appropriate. And then at the very end of that clip,
Russell doesn't want to be seen.
her younger son Russell, and he is a part of the allegations and the arrest, he at the time was like, I don't want to be on camera. He hides under a blanket, and then his mom Ruby is still shoving a camera in his face and filming him when he clearly said he did not want to be filmed. And honestly, with all of these clips, it has made me wonder what life is going to be like for the children of these influencers in a few years. Like, are these children going to be at a coffee shop as grown adults and someone's just gonna walk up to them and be like, hey, by the way, I saw you get potty trained. I saw you throw tantrums on the floor. I saw you take baths. Like, I'm just hoping that in a few years, or, I mean, not in a few years. Honestly, I wish that right now laws were put in place to protect these children of these influencers. Okay, I am sorry about all of that, but this case thoroughly pisses me off. From here on out, I'm going to try to keep the emotions and the opinions under wraps, and we're going to get into the facts and the technicalities of this case. Let's get into it. So Ruby Franke was born as Ruby Griffith on January 18th of 1982. She is the oldest of 5 siblings, and she was born to Jennifer and Chad Griffith. And honestly, it's kind of weird, but all of her other siblings are also influencers. They also have their YouTube channels, and even her parents are influencers. They call themselves Grandma and Grandpa Griffiths. And I'm sorry for my pronunciation. I don't know why. I have tried so hard to pronounce this name correctly, but I just can't. But they have their own Facebook page, they have their own Instagram, they have a YouTube channel, and they even have their own cookbook. And it's kind of been interesting to see how this entire thing has unfolded with the entire family involved and under the spotlight. Because they've had to acknowledge it because they're also influencers. And they can't just keep posting while the entire world knows that Ruby Franke has been arrested. And I'm pretty sure even Ruby Franke's oldest daughter, who is 20 years old, she also has her own YouTube channel, social media presence. Anyway, so back to Ruby Franke. What is known about her, aside from the fact that she was the oldest of her 5 siblings, she also grew up in the Church of Latter-day Saints, so she has been a Mormon her entire life. And unlike most young adults, she actually just stayed home with her family most of the time, and she was kind of like a homebody. And I couldn't find out if she dated anyone else, but articles have said that Kevin Franke was her long-term boyfriend before he became her husband. And since their oldest daughter is 20, it's fair to assume that they've been together for a little over 20 years. Now here's what is known about Kevin Franke. Kevin Franke is presently 44 years old, so he is 3 years older than Ruby Franke, and he graduated from college in 2004. He graduated from the University of Utah with a Bachelor in Science in Civil Engineering. And then he later got his PhD from Brigham University, and then from University of Washington he got his master's degree. His master's degree was also in civil engineering. His professional career began in 2006. He started working at Kleinfelder Incorporated as a geotechnical professional. And that essentially meant that he was working on or creating technologies for flood control, for different dams, or for waste containment. And then after receiving his PhD in 2011, he started working for URS Corporation. And there he was a geotechnical engineer. Then just a year later in 2012, he started working at Brigham Young University as an assistant professor. He currently teaches geotechnical engineering courses at that same school, or BYU. And speaking of his career as a professor, he was on Rate My Professor. However, as of the arrest and as of all of the allegations, his reviews on Rate My Professor have been taken down. However, some articles did screenshot them and recover the reviews before the website, or his part of the website, was taken down. And I'll be honest here, he had a very mixed bag of reviews. Some of the more recent ones after the arrest and after the allegations, I have to say, are a bit biased. They're very negative, very angry, and while they might be true, that has not been proven, and Kevin Franke is presently not guilty of anything, at least in a legal sense. So some of the reviews said that he was a great professor. However, many of them, dating back to 2022, said that if you had a different perspective than him, that he would look down on you or talk down to you. You could not have a differing opinion from him. Additionally, students commented that he was hard to reach out of class and different things like that. One of the more positive reviews was a bit conflicting because it said that he was a great professor and that no one should listen to the negative ratings. The student went on to say that BYU is a very homophobic university, but that is not Dr. Franke or Professor Franke's fault. And I've thought about this comment a few different ways, and honestly, I don't know what to think. My interpretation of it is the campus of BYU is homophobic, the culture is homophobic, and even if Professor Franke acts or has some homophobic underlying tones, it is not his fault. That's at least my interpretation of the comment, however, or the rating, but you can interpret it however you feel, and honestly, I'm curious, so let me know down below. But also, aside from being a professor, one of Kevin Franke's main jobs was being on the 8 Passengers YouTube channel, which he was frequently on in 2015 when the channel first began. Additionally, it has also come out that him and Ruby have been living separated for 13 months now. However, they are not divorced. However, according to an article that came out on September 14th of 2023, Ruby and Kevin split up because of a difference in parenting opinions. Also, during their 13-month separation, the kids were living with Ruby, and Kevin was apparently unaware that Ruby had moved them all to Ivins, Utah. Additionally, Kevin's attorney has commented that Ruby was controlling Kevin emotionally because she knew how much he cared about their marriage, and how marriage was such a sacred thing to him. Also, an interesting coincidence that doesn't seem like a coincidence is that Ruby started working with Jodi Hildebrandt around 13 to 15 months ago, and started becoming a regular on Jodi's YouTube channel called Connexions. Now, Kevin Franke hasn't done an official interview since his wife's arrest and charges, so a lot of this information is from his attorney. So he's essentially saying that their marriage started to fall apart after Ruby and Jodi started working together. And although Ruby was doing and saying some very messed up things on her YouTube channel prior to meeting Jodi, after meeting Jodi and hearing all of her podcasts and different views on parenting and children, it's very clear that Jodi does not like children and kind of doesn't view them as human. Jodi kind of has this master-servant view on parent and child.
So many of us that are parents, it's like, I don't want to have to track them down. I don't want to have to just, take everything away from them. And it's like, you're not taking things away from them. What you're doing is you've handed them things that they're not managing. And so it's your job to make sure that the first thing they manage is themselves. They understand how to manage themselves. They know how to be responsible for themselves. They know how to not blame. They know how to get curious, which means humble. They know how to ask questions. They know how to say, that doesn't feel right. Can you help me understand? They know how to do all that. And when you give them activities or you give them opportunities that they engage in where they can't manage themselves, they're only going to become more and more unmanageable inside of these activities.
Okay, I feel like that clip is the perfect segue into talking about Jodi Hildebrandt and who she is, how her and Ruby got involved together, etc. So Jodi Hildebrandt is a therapist. She is 54 years old and she is also a self-proclaimed life coach and author. And she has been working as a licensed therapist since 2007, and in 2007 that's also when she kind of came up with her brand called Connexions. And Connexions is essentially an educational program that she created, but it's like an educational therapy program, and it sprouted into a social media presence as well. And according to one man, Jodi Hildebrandt completely ruined his life. His name is Adam Paul Steed, and he was raised in the Church of Latter-day Saints and faced abuse from that church. Additionally, he faced abuse as a Boy Scout in a Mormon Boy Scout troop. Now as an adult, he is currently a national whistleblower, particularly on the topic of child sex abuse related to the Mormon Church. He is ultimately trying to get laws in place to protect children and prevent more children from going through what he had to go through. But here's where Jodi Hildebrandt came into play. When Adam was a young man, when he first got married, he went to Brigham Young University, and there his Mormon bishop recommended him to Jodi Hildebrandt to kind of counsel him on his marriage. And if you guys are somewhat familiar in this case, you've probably seen the headline that Jodi Hildebrandt had her therapy license removed or revoked in 2012 for an 18-month period. And that is because of Adam Steed. So I'm going to give you guys the complete context on that.
Jodi's doctrines right in the beginning was that addictions, everybody has addictions. So, how did I get in this porn addiction therapy group? I needed marriage counseling and some counseling for trauma with the abuse case that happened. But Jodi turned it, everybody has addictions. These are word for word quotes that Jodi said. And so we get into this therapy group. Jodi's really charismatic, my wife starts just loving it. I'm excited she's getting help. And some of the personal issues that she had struggled with. And I didn't originally mind the strictness with the group because I thought that, it was therapeutic to, there was a lot of guilt and shame behind masturbation and pornography in the Mormon church. I mean, I had a lot of guilt and shame. I mean, as a kid growing up, I had discovered masturbation a few weeks before I met Brad Stolz. And just on my own quietly, and I always believed that God sent this pedophile into my life to punish me because I was a sick person. I had a lot of guilt and shame, and I was like I was good everywhere else in my life.
So those clips are from the Mormon Stories podcast, and he did an interview with them, and it is an amazing podcast episode. I will have it linked below. It is a 6-hour podcast episode, but it gives you guys a really deep understanding of Jodi Hildebrandt and how she is connected to the Church of Latter-day Saints and all of the crimes that are just interwoven in that. And Adam said that to this day those topics are very triggering for him, but to not come after the host of that podcast because he volunteered to do that interview. And he felt, which I agree with him, that it is very important to get that story out there. So essentially after those clips, Adam goes into great detail on how Jodi Hildebrandt horrifically impacted his life. As you guys heard, him and his first wife started going to her for marriage counseling. However, she kind of twisted this counseling into a porn addiction type of counseling. And if you guys are familiar with religious trauma, or it's common in the Mormon church, the Catholic church, the Christian church, where things like porn and masturbation are heavily looked down upon, they are heavily judged, and a lot of people as adults still have a lot of guilt to work through regarding those subjects, even if they are not actually a porn addict or a sex addict. But Jodi Hildebrandt essentially made out Adam to be an addict and convinced his ex-wife, his first wife, of that too. And after his first wife kept seeing Jodi Hildebrandt, she would come home and for like a year deny him of physical intimacy. And then one day kind of like tricked him into thinking he was going to get physical intimacy, but then withheld it from him once again and made him feel like a horrible person. And I don't want to butcher this because honestly, after I just heard myself say that, I can see how that can be interpreted in many ways. But truly, they had a good relationship, they had a strong marriage, everything was great. But Jodi Hildebrandt was just planting these seeds that weren't actually true in his ex-wife's mind and in his mind. And you're probably wondering why. Is she just some wicked person, or did he actually do something to her? And no, he didn't. So Adam had a lot of trauma and still has a lot of trauma from being sexually abused as a young boy. And this happened especially in Boy Scouts, the Boy Scouts of America, and I'm sure you guys have heard horror stories about the Boy Scouts of America and sexual abuse. And just to give you guys one example, he was being abused and he started to pull away from the abuser. This abuse was happening at summer camp and he decided he did not want to go to summer camp anymore. However, his abuser then started talking to his little brother and getting his little brother wanting to go to this summer camp. And although Adam was not ready to share his story and share what happened yet in fear of judgment and prosecution, he decided to go to summer camp yet again so that way his little brother would not be harmed like he was. And truly, that entire 6-hour interview is so emotional and so impactful. I am not doing it justice. Truly, I will have it linked below. Just please go watch it. It will be linked if it's YouTube, but like I said, it is the Mormon Stories podcast. So look that up when you guys get a chance if you want a deeper understanding of this entire thing and of Jodi Hildebrandt. I know that was a long tangent, but Jodi Hildebrandt essentially did not want Adam to speak out about his abuse that he endured as a child from the Mormon church. And that is the main reason that Adam thinks that he was targeted by Jodi Hildebrandt, because he thought he was in a safe space with a counselor to open up about his traumas and heal from those. And like I said when I first started talking about Adam, he is now a whistleblower on those types of subjects and that sexual abuse, specifically child sexual abuse in the Mormon church. And Jodi, because she is all wrapped up in the Mormon church and she was referred by the Mormon bishop, she did not want that getting out. So she told the Mormon church, the Church of Latter-day Saints, his church and his university, Brigham Young University, that he had a porn addiction. And obviously that is a huge violation of patient-therapist, patient-doctor confidentiality. So to wrap that part up, that is why Jodi Hildebrandt had her license suspended for 18 months. Now, Adam is not the only person who has come forward and spoken out against Jodi Hildebrandt. Jodi Hildebrandt's own niece, Jessie Hildebrandt, has actually come out and spoke out against her as well. And what's interesting about her niece's interview, which is what I'm going to play for you guys in a moment, is that her niece actually kind of confirms my entire theory with this case. So I know I titled this video obviously I haven't titled it yet because I'm recording, probably titled it something about Ruby Franke. However, as I've gotten into this case, as I've been researching constantly, it seems that Jodi Hildebrandt should actually be the forefront of this case. Because from the fact that Kevin Franke only stopped living with his wife over a difference in parenting opinions after Jodi Hildebrandt came along, to the fact that Jodi Hildebrandt seems to be pulling the strings on Ruby Franke. And don't get me wrong, there are several clips from before they met that are questionable, like Ruby Franke, for instance, was homophobic already before she met Jodi Hildebrandt. However, that can be chalked up to her religion. However, the whole starving her children concept as a punishment and the binding of their wrists and their ankles, that screams Jodi Hildebrandt. And obviously Ruby is a grown-ass woman, so she can at the end of the day make her own decisions. If she malnourished her kids, if she abused her kids, which she did, that is on her. However, I would not deny the power of the influence that Jodi Hildebrandt seems to have on her. Like, it says a lot that Ruby and Kevin were together for 20 years, and yet when Jodi Hildebrandt came along, Kevin couldn't even stand by his wife anymore. So anyways, let's hear what Jessie Hildebrandt had to say about her aunt.
You were also under her care at one point, right?
Yeah, I was left in her care when I was a teenager, for a little under a year.
Have you met Ruby before?
No, I've never met Ruby. This is the first time I've ever heard of her. I have gone and watched at least some of her videos. They're very difficult to watch just for my own experience with that form of therapy. It's quite triggering, to be honest. So I've never met her, but the things that she is saying and regurgitating are very, very familiar to me. It's interesting to watch I understand this, but it's interesting to watch the world respond to her and kind of putting her at the forefront. And I understand that she's the mother of these children, and it makes sense. But the philosophies and the therapeutic modalities that she's using are Jodi's. And these are not new. These are not, This is a pattern that Jodi has been engaged with for at least 14 years. I don't know if there are other people that she's used these on, but she's definitely taught. I know that she teaches parents to use these types of therapies, as she would call them. So yeah, it's been a really interesting experience watching everyone focus on Ruby, and I understand why, but this is Jodi. These are Jodi's words. These are Jodi's ideas. These are over decades old. So, yeah.
Is that why you've called Jodi the mastermind behind all of this?
Yes. That doesn't excuse Ruby's involvement and her perpetuating these beliefs and these systems, but Ruby didn't come up with this. Ruby obviously supports it and has used these on her children. But this is coming from Jodi.
In short, can you describe what you mean? Like, which practices are you talking about, just to make sure we're clear, because I know there's a lot out there. So which ones are you talking about that you've seen, that you're hearing about pertaining to her children, that you're familiar with too?
Sure, yeah. So the things that I experienced while living with Jodi, I experienced being tied, I experienced being duct taped, I experienced being blindfolded, I experienced severe isolation, I experienced severe emotional, spiritual, and psychological abuse.
So that is an 18-minute interview, and it is very hard to watch because you can see the pain that her niece has clearly gone through because of her. And her niece confirms that while she lived with her aunt subjected her to unthinkable abuse. Her aunt bound her at the wrists and at the ankles, blindfolded her, malnourished her, isolated her, was very beyond judgmental when it came to topics like masturbation, porn, also accused her of having an addiction like she did with Adam Steed. And it kind of just seems like Jodi with this whole Connexions thing, because Connexions is her brand, and as some people have compared it to a cult, the Connexions cult. These values, these horrible values and ways of parenting that she is trying to push on fellow parents. And with every single type of abuse that Jessie described, that is exactly what Ruby's 12-year-old son Russell was subjected to. He climbed out of Jodi Hildebrandt's windows, bound at the wrists and bound at the ankles. He was probably terrified. He was terrified when he arrived to the neighbor's house to ask for help, and that is so brave. Honestly, we should all be applauding Russell for his bravery, because after being subjected to that abuse, especially for how long, we don't even know how long, at least the past 13 months, at the very least. That is so brave. And he is only 12 years old. He is responsible for saving the rest of his siblings. Let's just put it that way. He saved them. He is the one to thank. He is the hero in this case. If there is a hero, it is Russell. And towards the end of the interview, which obviously I didn't play on here, but once again, if you're watching on YouTube, that interview will be linked below this video. Please go watch it, because Jessie also gives a very heartfelt message to Russell, and that is well deserved, because I have to say, although Kevin Franke isn't guilty of anything legally, at least at this point, he did not speak out for his children. And she did that. She spoke out for his children, for him and Ruby's children, with empathy and love and care. So shout out to Jessie. So another thing that came out recently is that the cops were actually called to the Franke residence twice. And these calls occurred in 2022, and one of them I believe was on September 18th of 2022, and Ruby Franke's oldest daughter called for a welfare check. And nothing came of these calls, and neighbors were also extremely concerned about the Franke children, because according to them, which they've come out with this now, the neighbors, she would just leave for weeks at a time with Jodi Hildebrandt, and they would be left to fend for themselves. And obviously they did not have much food. They lived under these very strict guidelines, which I'm sure in the near future we will learn more about the Connexions, principles, and values. Sucks to call them that, but I guess they are. They're twisted principles and values, but they're principles and values for sure. And the sad thing is that the authorities were there twice, and yet nothing came of it until 2023. And as we brushed on a few moments ago, Russell bravely escaped from Jodi Hildebrandt's home, and his other minor siblings were inside the home, but he escaped. He was bound at the wrists and at the ankles, he had open wounds, and he was very malnourished, and he was also thirsty. And he ran to the neighbor's house asking for help, and the neighbors at 10:50 p.m. on August 30th of 2023 called 911. And this was that 911 call.
911, the address of your emergency. Tell me exactly what's happened.
I just had a 12-year-old boy show up here at my front door asking for help. You know, there's been problems at this neighbor's house. He's emaciated, he's got tape around his legs, he's hungry, and he's thirsty. And he asked us to call the police.
What's
so he's very afraid. This kid has obviously been, I think he's been detained. He's obviously covered in wounds. We need the cops here as soon as possible.
Ruby said a 12-year-old male showed up with tape around his legs, thirsty, asking for help, said he was afraid, asking for police. Deborah, he gave the name of Russell Franke, unknown date of birth, or he did give us a date of birth, but I'm not showing any Russells in Stillman. I'll keep looking into that. The RP said he left through the porch of the neighbor's house. Does have duct tape around each ankle. He's not telling the RP why, and said that there's sores around his wrists and ankles. He's becoming, or correction, the RP is becoming emotional. Sorry, the RP said that he left from a neighbor's of Jodi Hildebrandt in Ivan's 54-year-old female. Not sure if they're related. When asking the RP's parents info, he said his mom is Ruby Franke, unknown where she lives.
When officers arrived, all of the children were removed from the home, and they did not know where Ruby Franke was. They also at the time did not know Ruby Franke's address. To the officers, this was all absolutely new information. And Jodi Hildebrandt's home, I believe, was in Santa Clara, Utah. And Ruby Franke lived in Ivins, Utah with the children. After all of the children were removed from the home, 2 of them were hospitalized. One of them was Russell, and I believe the other one was Eve, but I'm not sure. I might, in a few minutes, come back and say otherwise, but I'm pretty sure it was Eve, and Eve was the youngest one. And so 2 of the children were hospitalized, the rest were put into the custody of the state. Kevin Franke presently does not have custody of his children, and soon after, Ruby Franke and Jodi Hildebrandt were arrested and charged with 6 counts of aggravated child abuse, which was later changed to 6 counts of felony child abuse. Last Friday, September 8th of 2023, was Ruby Franke and Jodi Hildebrandt's first court appearance, and this was done via Zoom or via online. The Zoom link for their court appearance was leaked on TikTok, and thousands of people ended up joining. However, because of how disruptive they were, they had to shut down public access. And originally, Ruby Franke and Jodi Hildebrandt were not given the same judge. However, they requested the same judge, and ultimately that wish was granted. Now, Ruby Franke made some monstrous accusations in the courtroom that day. Instead of opening up to her abusive nature and admitting to it, she actually tried to justify it. And she tried to justify her abuse by blaming her own children. Now, this is deeply disgusting and deeply disturbing what her accusations were, and none of her family members have corroborated her story whatsoever, and her own parents and her own siblings have distanced themselves from her because of this. So Ruby Franke in court essentially said that one of her children started sexually abusing the rest of her children, and that they also sexually abused up to 20 other of their family members. And then one of the children that child was sexually abusing started joining into the sexual abuse. And so 2 siblings out of the 6 children were sexually abusing the 4 other siblings. And she did not name names here, but obviously these allegations are fake. Obviously, because she said them, they are going to be looked into, but I'm assuming they're fake, especially considering her children are innocent in all of this, and she was the one doing the abusing here. But she said that the 2 children who were sexually abusing the other 4 children had this game called the patting game. And during the patting game, that is how they would justify touching their other siblings inappropriately. So, yeah. They're looking into that currently, the authorities and the investigators and the courts and the different lawyers, but that is what she said. She tried to blame her children for her abusing them. Like, she tried to justify her strict parenting methods because of her children. I don't know what else to say besides the fact that that is one fucked up mom. The other thing that came out of that court hearing is that Jodi Hildebrandt and Ruby Franke are going to continue to be held without bond. So there's no amount of money that someone can pay that will get them out of jail at the moment. That same day, Friday, September 8th, Ruby Franke apparently started experiencing some sort of medical issue that put her in the medical block of the jail. And currently, her and Jodi are being held at the Utah County Jail. And Ruby was only there over the weekend, but is now back in her regular cell. And apparently, Jodi Hildebrandt has some life-threatening condition that also left her hospitalized for a few days. And allegedly, the 2 women are upset that they are not in the same jail cell. And that brings us to a theory, not a fact. So earlier in this podcast, we started talking about Adam Steed. And if you actually go and watch Adam Steed's interview, later on in the interview, he mentions that Jodi Hildebrandt and his ex-wife, his first wife, started a very inappropriate relationship. Some people have speculated that this inappropriate relationship was a lesbian relationship. And this theory is kind of further fueled by a woman named Deborah Monson, and Deborah Monson essentially spent 3 nights in jail with Ruby and Jodi, and described Ruby as very upset that her and Jodi were not sharing a cell, and she seemed very, childlike and smitten with Jodi Hildebrandt. And childlike and smitten, those are Deborah's words. So that is what she said. She told Insider News that it's unknown whether or not that is true, but that is her depiction of the 2 of them. So that combined with the fact that Adam Steed came out and said that Jodi Hildebrandt and his ex-wife had a inappropriate relationship, that is why people have formulated this theory. And this theory really doesn't have any impact on the case itself. Either way, Ruby Franke and Jodi Hildebrandt abused Ruby Franke's children. It doesn't necessarily matter if they're in a relationship. Obviously, that is infidelity on Ruby Franke's part. But yeah, just thought that might be an interesting piece of information you guys would like to know. Once again, back to the facts, Ruby Franke and Jodi Hildebrandt's next court appearance is 2 days from now. It is on Monday, September 18th of 2023, and here's what to expect. So the court appearance is taking place in St. George. It could be determined in this next court appearance if they might be allowed out on bail, and whether or not they are allowed out on bail will determine the trajectory for the rest of this case. And by change the trajectory, I mean that if they are allowed out on bail, that this whole process, this whole court process of them being tried, it might take a lot longer. However, if they are continued to be held without bail, things might speed along a lot more. A big part in that decision making is the judge determining whether or not they are at risk of fleeing. The other factor they're going to be considering is whether or not the two women pose as a threat to the public. Additionally, this part is unknown yet, but they could be setting a date for the preliminary hearing. And as it stands now, those are the updates on the Jodi Hildebrandt and Ruby Franke case. So thank you guys so much for watching to the end of the episode. I really appreciate it. And if you're watching or listening on Spotify, at the very end of this video, there's going to be a little bit of a poll or a survey so you can help pick what case we are going to talk about next week. And I promise next Saturday there's going to be a video up. I am so sorry, truly, it has been killing me the past week not to post, but I hope this video was worth it and made up for that. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you guys next week.